In 1241, at a tournament in Neuss, Germany, more than 80 knights died, not from battle, but from suffocating inside their own armor. As horses thundered across the field, clouds of dust filled the air until no one could see or breathe. When men fell, the weight of 60 pounds of steel kept them pinned to the ground, struggling for air. Around them, chaos erupted. Riders collided, horses stumbled, and the heat inside the armor became unbearable. One by one, the knights began to collapse, not from sword blows, but from exhaustion, heat stroke, and the crushing press of metal. This wasn't war. This was supposed to be sport. The romanticized image of knights, gallant warriors dueling with honor and restraint, is one of history's most enduring myths. The reality was far bloodier, more brutal, and infinitely more complicated. When we imagine medieval knights, we see polished armor gleaming in the sun, ladies' favors tied to lances, and noble warriors bowing respectfully before combat. This image comes largely from later medieval romance literature. Stories written centuries after the fact, when actual knights had become increasingly rare, and their brutality could be safely sanitized into legend. The word chivalry itself comes from the French chevalier, meaning horseman or knight. By the 13th century, it had evolved into an elaborate code supposedly guiding knightly behavior. Protect the weak, honor your lord, respect women, and fight with courage and fairness. But here's the truth. That code was more wishful thinking than reality. Medieval writers and churchmen promoted these ideals precisely because knights were doing the opposite. The very existence of so many sermons and treatises on moral conduct tells us just how brutal knightly behavior had become. In their earliest form, tournaments were nothing like the organized jousts of later centuries. They were brutal melees, where dozens of knights charged across open fields in combat that was barely different from real war. Picture this: two armies of knights, sometimes hundreds on each side, charging across miles of countryside. They fought with real weapons, sharp swords, war lances, and maces designed to crush skulls through helmets. The only significant difference from actual battle was that knights tried to capture rather than kill their opponents, because a living prisoner could be ransomed for cash. But trying not to kill didn't mean showing mercy. It meant beating your opponent into submission, dragging him off his horse, and pinning him down until he surrendered. In the chaos of dozens of mounted warriors colliding at full gallop, accidents were inevitable. The 1285 tournament at Chauvency, one of the most famous medieval tournaments, attended by hundreds of nobles and meticulously documented by poet Jacques Bretel, descended into horrifying carnage. Bretel watched horses crash together, riders pile up in tangled heaps of metal and flesh. From the stands, the crowd shouted and murmured in disbelief as the wounded were dragged out of the field. One herald at Chauvency openly mocked the entire affair, saying the ladies who sponsored these events bore responsibility for luring young men to injury and death with the promise of honor and romantic attention. Here's something rarely mentioned in tales of chivalry. Tournaments were profit-making enterprises. The point wasn't just glory, it was money. When a knight captured an opponent, he claimed not only a ransom payment, but also the loser's horse, armor, and weapons. A well-trained warhorse could cost as much as a small manor. A full suit of armor represented years of a craftsman's wages. Successful tournament fighters could become wealthy through organized violence. This created perverse incentives. Knights fought brutally, not despite the chivalric code, but because their economic survival demanded it. William Marshall, one of medieval England's most celebrated knights, made his fortune on the tournament circuit, capturing and ransoming opponents in what was essentially sanctioned robbery with extra steps. The ransoming system also explains why chivalry was so selective. Knights extended courtesy to other knights, fellow nobles who could pay ransoms. Peasant soldiers received no such consideration. Common foot soldiers were slaughtered without ceremony, their bodies left to rot because they had no financial value. Perhaps the most disturbing manifestation of knightly culture was trial by combat, judicial duels where legal disputes were settled through violence. This wasn't just accepted, it was institutionalized by legal systems across medieval Europe. The logic was straightforward if horrifying. God would grant victory to the righteous party. Therefore, whoever survived a fight to the death must have had the better legal claim. In practice, this meant wealthy nobles could essentially purchase verdicts by hiring skilled fighters as their champions. Poor litigants faced impossible choices: fight yourself and probably die, or pay for a professional fighter you couldn't afford. These weren't staged performances, they were brutal, often fatal encounters. Combatants fought with clubs, shields, and sometimes their bare hands in pits specifically designed for judicial combat. The fights continued until one party was dead or yielded, and yielding didn't guarantee mercy. Women occasionally fought in these trials, particularly in cases involving rape or sexual violence. Medieval legal systems offered women so few avenues for justice that some chose to fight their attackers in single combat, rather than face dismissal by male judges. The Catholic Church knew tournaments were bloodbaths. Pope Innocent II denounced them in 1130 as detestable markets and fairs, where knights displayed rash boldness. The Church even denied Christian burial to those killed in tournaments, hoping that the threat of eternal damnation would be enough to end the practice. But the warning fell on deaf ears. Knights continued to clash in defiance of papal decrees drawn by glory, wealth, and reputation. For nearly 2 more centuries, the blood sport endured, until the Church finally conceded defeat and lifted the ban in 1316. Why did the Church oppose tournaments so vehemently? Because they were breeding grounds for exactly the behavior clergy were trying to eliminate: violence for sport, gambling, drunkenness, sexual impropriety, and the casual destruction of human life for entertainment. Even kings sometimes tried to ban tournaments, not from moral objections, but because they weakened royal control. Knights who died or became disabled in tournaments couldn't serve in actual wars. The skills tournaments supposedly taught were undermined by the injuries they produced. The line between tournament and genuine combat was alarmingly thin. At the 1273 Little Battle of Chalons, a tournament between England's King Edward I and the Count of Chalons escalated from friendly competition to outright warfare. Edward took offense when the Count tried to capture him according to tournament rules. What began as organized sport degenerated into a chaotic brawl where spectators were killed alongside combatants. In 1381, during a truce in the 100 Years' War, English and French knights drank together at a country inn. One Frenchman, Jean Bussinel, browbeat an English knight named Nicholas Clifford into an impromptu joust. Clifford tried to decline, but Bussinel's insinuations of cowardice left him no choice. The next morning, in borrowed armor, Clifford's lance struck Bussinel in the neck and killed him instantly. The French were outraged. The English feared revenge. The Constable of France had to personally intervene to prevent the incident from rupturing the fragile truce. The Constable's words reveal the mindset perfectly. It is better to hurt one's enemy than to be hurt by him. Such is the fate of war. But it wasn't war. It was a drunk man's challenge, a borrowed suit of armor, and a pointless death over wounded pride. Medieval armor, while offering protection, created its own dangers. A fully armored knight wore 50 to 70 pounds of steel. In hot weather, that armor became a mobile oven. Knights routinely collapsed from heat exhaustion, especially when battles or tournaments dragged on for hours. Once a knight fell, getting back up was nearly impossible without assistance. The weight distribution made rising from the ground extraordinarily difficult. In the crush of a melee, fallen knights risked being trampled by horses or crushed under other fallen bodies. The Neuss tournament disaster wasn't unique. It was just the most catastrophic example of armor's built-in vulnerability. In dusty conditions, with hundreds of horses churning up the ground, knights literally couldn't breathe through the limited ventilation of their helmets. They suffocated while fighting for glory and prize money. The most damning aspect of medieval chivalry is how narrowly it applied. Knights extended courtesy, quarter, and ransom opportunities to fellow nobles. Everyone else, peasants, merchants, enemy soldiers of common birth, could expect no such mercy. Medieval warfare consistently demonstrated this double standard. Knights taken prisoner lived in comfortable captivity, playing chess and dining with their captors, while ransom negotiations proceeded. Meanwhile, armies routinely massacred peasant conscripts, burned villages, and slaughtered civilians with no pretense of restraint. The chivalric code wasn't about reducing violence. It was about creating a club where elite warriors protected each other's interests while inflicting maximum brutality on everyone outside their class. By the 15th century, tournaments had evolved. Specialized armor appeared, designed specifically for jousting with reinforced sections and limited mobility. Blunted weapons replaced sharp ones. Elaborate rules codified what had once been chaotic free-for-alls. But the transformation came too late for the thousands who died in earlier centuries, when sport and slaughter were barely distinguishable. King Henry II of France died in 1559 from a jousting accident. A splinter from his opponent's shattered lance pierced his eye and penetrated his brain. Even in this supposedly safer era, the essential violence remained. The myth of chivalrous knights serves a purpose. It lets us imagine a past where violence had rules, where warriors operated under honorable constraints, where brutality was tempered by nobility. It's a comforting fiction. The reality was men in metal suits beating each other unconscious for prize money, legal systems that settled disputes through sanctioned murder, and a warrior class that romanticized violence while inflicting it primarily on people who couldn't fight back. Medieval knights weren't noble heroes restrained by honor. They were professional fighters operating in a system that rewarded savagery while wrapping it in the language of virtue. The code of chivalry didn't prevent violence. It justified it, giving brutality the appearance of honor. The next time you see a movie depicting gleaming knights in honorable combat, remember Neuss. Remember the 80 men who suffocated in the dust, killed not by enemies, but by their own equipment, their own pride, and a culture that celebrated violence as virtue. That's the real story of knightly duels. Not chivalrous, just nasty. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.